All right, let's jump right into it. In this quick 7-minute explainer, we are going to build a really wholesome understanding of a pretty wild topic, the mechanics of our own minds. We're going to unpack exactly why we humans hold on to our beliefs so incredibly tightly, even when, we might actually be wrong. If you've ever wondered why you think the way you do, or why it is so insanely hard to let go of certain ideas, well, you are in exactly the right place.
So picture this. Think of a really frustrating time. Maybe it was a tense holiday dinner or a tough meeting at work where you laid out perfectly logical, undeniable facts to someone and nothing. You just hit an absolute brick wall. Why does that happen? I mean, if we were just rational computers, disagreements would vanish the second new data showed up, right? You just present the spreadsheet, the logic would compute, and boom, everyone agrees. But as we all know, they don't. And honestly, that stubbornness is our absolute biggest clue into how the human brain actually operates.
First things first, we've got to toss out the idea that beliefs are just static, dusty files in a cabinet that we pull out when we need a random fact. Instead, think of beliefs as an active working model. Imagine a super busy karashi dhaba, a vibrant, chaotic street-side cafe. The cooks in that kitchen, they aren't aiming for some Michelin star, scientifically perfect truth with every single dish. No way. They rely on shortcuts. They need speed, they need to know what's useful, and they need to know which orders to trust just to survive the dinner rush. Well, our belief system works exactly the same way. It is a very active map, and its main goal is survival and efficiency, not perfect truth. Okay, that brings us to section 1, the meaning-making system, interpreting our reality. Let's see how this mental map actually functions day to day. Here's the thing. Our minds absolutely despise messy, raw experience. Reality hits our senses as chaotic noise and totally random fragments. To survive without just shutting down, our brain desperately has to compress all that noise into a usable story. We don't passively record life like a video camera. The second something happens, our minds automatically builds an interpretive frame. We instantly ask, why did this happen? What does this say about me? What does it say about other people? And what should I do now? The brain does this in a split second to kill uncertainty. So an event might be shared by everyone in a room, but your interpretation of it, that is completely uniquely yours.
Basically, a belief does 4 very distinct jobs for us, all at the same time. It explains, it organizes, it protects, and it guides. Imagine walking through a pitch-black room in a house you have never been in before. You don't need a millimeter-accurate blueprint of every single object in the room, right? That would take way too long. You just need enough of a mental structure to avoid bumping your shins into the coffee table, find the door handle, and get out safely. Belief provides that exact structure. It lets us act confidently without freezing up while waiting for total, perfect certainty.
And this right here is exactly why some ideas carry so much heavy weight. A belief system is deeply, deeply interconnected. Think of it like the delicate, mismatched wiring in an old house. If you change one fuse too suddenly, the whole building goes dark. Or think of it like a spine. If you pull out or shift just one single bone, the entire posture of your identity threatens to collapse. So when someone says to you, I just feel this is true, what they might actually be saying is, this fits who I think I am, and I literally cannot afford to lose that. Which leads us perfectly into section 2, how beliefs take root, forming and hardening. Let's look at the life cycle of a belief. How does a tiny, fragile interpretation of an event harden into this unshakable reality? Well, it usually kicks off with a raw experience, which is then immediately followed by meaning. Because we are ultimate pattern-seeking machines, we connect the dots first and check the facts later. Then add in repetition, emotion, and social reinforcement. For example, think of a kid who feels ignored by an adult. They don't just log that as one isolated incident. Through the heavy emotion of that moment and repetition over time, they might conclude, my voice doesn't matter. What started as a fragile interpretation turns into a lifelong rule that governs whether they speak up in meetings 20 years later. And once that belief is planted, we experience something called the radio tuner effect. It is a wild byproduct of human attention, and spoiler alert, we all do it. Once your internal dial is set to a certain station, that specific frequency comes through crystal clear, while all the other conflicting signals, they just fade into static. We naturally and totally subconsciously tune into evidence that confirms our existing map of the world, and we effortlessly just ignore all the rest. And when these 3 specific forces line up, what we call the triad of certainty, a belief becomes incredibly deeply rooted.
You've got the personal experience, right? But then there's emotion. Emotion is literally like superglue. Things like fear, pride, shame, they signal to the brain, hey, this matters for our survival. Then toss in social reinforcement. When your friends and community agree with you, suddenly abandoning this belief means risking losing your entire tribe. Going from an internal feeling to an external social pressure makes changing your mind incredibly costly.
All right, moving on to Section 3, how beliefs actually shift, the mechanics of change.
So, if beliefs are this entrenched and tied to our survival and our friends, how on earth do we ever change our minds? Well, here is the secret. People almost never change their minds just because they lost a logical argument. Change takes a totally different toolkit. To actually replace a deeply held belief, our minds need a very specific equation. Mismatch plus safety plus a better story equals change. First, you need repeated mismatches with reality. The old belief just isn't predicting the world right anymore. But crucially, you desperately need emotional safety and a better story. If you just demolish someone's old belief with cold, hard facts, you create a terrifying vacuum. We have to have a better, safer explanation to step into, or we'll just mentally collapse. Replacement matters so much more than demolition. When you look at the difference between a shallow surface belief and a deep identity belief, it becomes completely obvious why some conversations can change opinions, but not lives. On the surface, it's pretty easy to accept a factual correction, like, oh, that person wasn't being rude to me, they were just stressed out about their dog. Boom, easy update. But look at the identity layer. I am someone who always gets rejected. We will fight tooth and nail to defend these deep rules because our entire self-story is on the line. The deeper the layer, the harder the shift. I want to just pause for a second on this thought. People do not merely hold beliefs. Beliefs hold together a person's sense of how the world works and how they can survive inside it. Man, once you really internalize that, you stop treating every single disagreement like a simple clash of facts. You start to see the immense structural and emotional weight that beliefs carry for our everyday survival. And that brings us to our final part, Section 4, navigating our own beliefs, thinking clearly without losing yourself. We've spent this whole time talking about how other people form and hold on to beliefs, but what about us? The goal of this explainer isn't to walk away with absolutely zero beliefs. That's literally impossible. The goal is to hold our beliefs with enough clarity and self-awareness that they don't silently control us. So, I'm going to leave you with a question to chew on. The next time a belief feels just absolutely 100% obvious to you, the next time you feel completely certain about a situation, pause and ask yourself, what is this belief helping me do, protect, or explain? By interrogating our own certainty, we can spark a really lasting curiosity about our own minds. Thanks for exploring this with me today. Keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.